Hi, Sharana from Pair Weight. I had a question for all three of you, but for Joe specifically, I wanted to piggyback off of, you know, this blacks learn from slavery, blacks learn how to struggle and not how to live.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as this is about breaking generational curses, I wanted to ask you why it was so important of including the moment of Ashton's character to actually break, kind of this cycle, the sins of the father, but also too for Ashton and Jeffrey. I wanted to know, do you feel as though your characters really learn how to actually live by having to go to prison and self-reflect on kind of the sins, that you had in the past?
Um, I'm gonna jump in and say a couple words about that quote before they dive in, if it's okay. So African Americans, we have endured and in many cases have thrived, right? Despite this country being built on our enslavement. So we're survivors. But I think the question that I think Ja's character is asking himself in that moment as he's reflecting on his life is, have we ever been just free to just live, right? So free of institutional racism, free of racist policies, free of microaggressions and subconscious bias. Like the idea of, or the tragedy, there's one voiceover line, the tragedy of being forced to make that prison into a life as an African American, I think is what I'm getting at the heart of that voiceover. It's less about him having to go to prison to figure this out. It's him being in prison and realizing that the circumstances that he's facing inside aren't that much different than the societal systemic barriers that are placed around him and his society outside. So it's like where is the delineation between the two? And that's the struggle. I think that's the journey he's on to find answers for. Y'all gonna have to answer. Don't mess around with me over there, Ashton. I see you're not answering. You gotta answer the question now, bro.
No, dude. Yeah, no, that was just a great, thoughtful answer. I was just thinking about it. Yeah, I mean, I feel like unfortunately, Ja did have to go through what he had to go through in order to get to where he's at in the point of his life that he's at within the film that we leave him at. That's definitely, I feel like that's a part of the story. Like we unfortunately have to go through unfortunate things in order to get the picture, and I feel like, again, unfortunately, that's just a part of his story. And also, I feel like that's what's so inspiring about it too. Like we don't have to go through it ourselves. We can watch this movie and see it, see it happening. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, it's a fascinating phenomenon. And as far as these characters go, and I think, perhaps to some extent generally, I think the issue is the incarceration or the imprisonment before the walls, being imprisoned by missed opportunity and absence of opportunity and absence of resources. I mean, they're in some ways, again, going back to this experience of being with these men for so long on the inside, it was very clear that their path was set early on. By the time they were 5 almost, they were already in prison, even though the walls weren't apparent. And so that, once the walls do kind of close in, yeah, there is often, often they become a chrysalis for, a kind of metamorphosis. I mean, Malcolm X is the apex example of that. And I can't really answer this question because it's always been a conundrum, a puzzle for me. And it's a major tragedy for me that chrysalis can't exist or doesn't exist often prior to the walls closing in, and that put, and that's the nature of the imprisonment outside the wall, is being imprisoned in a lesser self, and being imprisoned in such a way that the greater self can't find room to flourish. And somehow inside the cell, in isolation, it's actually more possible than it is on the outside in some cases, which is a weird tragedy.